Nearly 25% of the entire national debt that took over 200 years to accumulate was added by just one administration alone, the last one. They're the facts. Check it out. Check it out. How did Congress respond to that debt? They did the right thing. They lifted the debt ceiling 3 times without preconditions or crisis. They paid American bills to prevent an economic disaster to the country. So tonight I'm asking the Congress to follow suit.
But it is true, despite Kevin McCarthy sitting behind the president going, that's not true.
Right.
We both know and can fact check it. It's absolutely true. The debt ceiling, of course it did, took center stage during the president's State of the Union address earlier this evening. He told Republicans to do the same darn thing they did, not once, not twice, but 3 times during the Trump administration. Let the debt limit be raised without any conditions. That comes as House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is continuing to call on the White House to negotiate spending cuts. But here's the problem. He hasn't given any specifics about what he actually wants cut before agreeing to pay the bills that America has already incurred. But what was the big news of the night? It seemed that President Biden got a verbal commitment from the Republican House that entitlement cuts, they're off the table. So let's discuss and bring in Robert Gibbs, former White House press secretary under President Obama, and David Plouffe, former Obama campaign manager and White House senior advisor. David, to you first. You have known Joe Biden for many, many years. How would you say his speech was tonight?
Well, that part of it in particular, I think, was skillfully designed and executed. So, and what's interesting about it, it's not like the Republicans in the House tomorrow are going to say, you know, Biden was lying about us. We're actually for Social Security and Medicare cuts. So I think he sort of boxed them in. And I think he basically unmasked this entire thing as not serious, as a charade, as being inconsistent. I still worry that I don't see an exit ramp. But I think that, you know, last night or a few hours ago, that speech, I do think, advantaged the president and Democrats in this debate, which I think is really important. But I'm not going to breathe a sigh of relief, Stephanie, until, you know, the exit ramp is clear. Like, how do we avert basically economic global catastrophe? But I thought that in particular was both designed, because that wasn't audible, that was a design play, but he executed it extremely well.
Right, it was a little bit of stagecraft.
But wait. Here's the exit ramp. Mitch McConnell watched all of that go down tonight, watched the mess of the House, and is going to be banging down Kevin McCarthy's door and saying, getting your house in order, just like huge GOP donors, huge GOP backers who really understand how this works and are going to demand that it happens. Won't that be the exit ramp?
Well, eventually, but not now. McConnell's going to play very quietly in the background. Because, of course, if this gets to the last week, as you remember back in 2011, you know, market dropped 20%, borrowing costs skyrocketed. So there's no reason to do that. So, you know, the question is, when will McConnell pull the ripcord? You know, I'd love to see the ripcord pulled in the next, 45 days. That's generally not how Washington works. So, yes, he's going to be probably the key player to figure a way out of this. But I think he's going to sit back for a while. Would be my guess.
The interesting thing about this, Robert, is that what it does show is that Biden seemed to imply he's willing to work with McCarthy, but that he is working with McConnell. We saw that in the week of struggle for McCarthy getting his job, that McConnell and Biden were out there cutting the ribbon on new bridges. In the end, what you saw of Republicans in the House tonight was the chaos that we saw a few weeks ago when McCarthy became Speaker. And what you saw from Biden is that I got things to do. I've been getting stuff done. I need more to get done. And are you guys with me or not?
Yeah, and I think that contrast suits the president really, really well. Look, watching the State of the Union now has been like watching the Super Bowl with two of the fan bases sitting on the couch together, right? It's with all due respect to Plouffe's Eagles, but it's just become like a blood sport. And I think in many ways that serves the president well in an enormous way, because he started tonight talking about both the bipartisan accomplishments, but also importantly, the bipartisan things he wants to do. He gets credit for reaching his hand out, and he gets stronger if the Republicans knock that hand away. And boy, I loved hearing tonight a lot of talk about the middle class, about blue-collar jobs, the blue-collar blueprint to rebuild America. Boy, I think those are phrases that I know a lot of Democrats hope we hear a lot of in the next 2 years.
Robert, did you see did you feel any glimmer of hope whatsoever that the Republican Party that we knew from 5, 10, 15 years ago could possibly emerge? I mean, even reportedly, Mitt Romney basically saying to George Santos, beat it, you don't belong here.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting subplot of this whole thing, watching that replay again, the Romney-Santos thing. But look, no, I don't have extraordinarily high hopes that we're going to see a lot of bipartisanship in this Congress. I think the Republican House is going to steer its own course, and I don't think that's going to be one that Joe Biden wants to follow. I do think he'll get political credit for trying, and I do think there are things that could get done if Republicans would work with Democrats. I think, again, the strong suit in this speech was finishing the job and continuing to do the things that the American people know make their lives more affordable. And look, for Joe Biden, this economic argument isn't going to be won tonight. There's still a ton of anxiety out in the American public about inflation and high costs. This is a 2-year argument, but it was a good start for Joe Biden tonight.
But you saw Collins, Murkowski, Sinema, Manchin, Collins all sitting together and standing together in unison when the president said the union is strong.
So, David, to the extent that I think you're right. The Republicans are not going to come out and say because we stood up for Joe Biden talking about Social Security, we're going to change our policies on this thing. Was there anything that Joe Biden said tonight that you think does move any needle other than being a good speech?
Well, first of all, I think in terms of the debt ceiling, I think maybe it wasn't a checkmate move, but he definitely played chess tonight, and I think strengthened his hand, and that's enormously important, not just navigating through the debt ceiling, but obviously the country needs, substantively, and he needs politically, as strong an economy as possible. And if we actually defaulted our debt or got close to that, it's going to hurt. So I think that was a big piece of business. And I agree with Robert. I think, if there's connective tissue between tonight and election day of 2024. And, he's talking about, the blue collar blueprint, and he's really talking about people and focused on jobs for people without college degrees, focused on rural areas, focused on blue collar areas that have been hurt. That is home base for Joe Biden. And it's one of the reasons he won in 2020. Was he outperformed certainly what Democrats did in 2016. So I think those were really, really important moments of the speech. Listen, this speech in and of itself is not going to move the needle, except that I do think that he played a big, big card tonight, skillfully, again, on the debt ceiling. But I think he laid out a blueprint for Democrats, both himself and up and down the ballot, for how they talk about the economy. And you cannot, and Robert's right, he's going to get credit for continually, every day, despite all odds, saying, I want to work with Republicans. He'll get credit for that. But he should not feel imprisoned by what can pass in Congress and what can't. And so there was a really robust agenda about the unfinished business for the country economically. And I hope to see that continue day in and day out. Yes, I want to work with Republicans, but this is my vision. This is what we need to do to lift the middle class, to help those who are trying to get in the middle class. Again, that's not just Joe Biden's home base, and it is. He speaks as authentically as any politician in modern times. But that's how you win elections in battleground states.
Did you hear that he did make that point to say creating jobs, many for people that do not require a college education, that pay something like $100,000, $130,000. In your home state of Pennsylvania, newly elected Governor Josh Shapiro, his first order of business was to change the job requirements for thousands of jobs in that state. No college degree required.
Right. And my Eagles on display there on the bottom right corner of the...
His Eagles, okay?
Fly Eagles fly, Ali. Fly Eagles fly. Yes.
There you go. Guys, thanks very much for being with us. Robert Gibbs and David Plouffe, thank you.